Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel, Calvin Wazoo. Today, we're going to talk about some more vinyl, a little shorter video, I hope, than the one I published before this one. That was a long one, and I hope to not do very many that are that long. So, today, we're going to talk about part two, the albums of my decades, and we're going to be talking about the year 1973, which is actually a half decade. In the first episode of this, I did my albums that I have from my birth year, 1958, and then from the next decade, 1968. I'm going to go a half decade this time. So when I was about a sophomore and junior in high school, 1973, because there was a lot of interesting and very cool music that was released at that time that I have. So let's get started right away. And I'm going to start off with two here because Elton John released two albums in 1973. There's Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player, and then there is Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Both very solid albums, both really good albums. I probably like this one better. I have more memories of this one from high school, particularly the songs such as, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and what was the other one? Candle in the Wind, and but of course, Benny and the Jets. These are, big hits, iconic songs that I definitely associate with my high school years. Not to, slouch on this one. This is a great one too, in particular because of the song Crocodile Rock. That was also a big hit. Remember it very well, in high school. So great stuff by Elton John at that time. Then I can remember being in a store. I think it was called Giant. You remember Giant? They were kind of like a big general merchandise store like Kmart. And anyway, they had records, and I would go there on occasion. And sure enough, this is what I saw. So Houses of the Holy, Led Zeppelin. Great, great, great Led Zeppelin album. One of their better ones. This happens to be a Robert Ludwig mix. However, the RL mixes of this do not command the huge premiums that the RL hot mix of Led Zeppelin 2 commands in the market. So if someone's trying to, if you run into a cellar and you see this like marked up and like $30, $40, something like that, no. I got this for 19 bucks in really good condition. So, but it's a great one from my, about that era of my sophomore and junior years in high school, 1973. Moving along, we come up to this one. Uh, you know, you see this cover. Do you really need me to identify what it is? But I will, because you can't hear images. Anyway, Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd. Again, classic, iconic album. I can remember listening to this. I was probably around 14, 15, maybe 16. I don't remember when I first heard it, but it was like, it's just an amazing album. And I've mentioned this before. The engineering, the sound engineering on this album is incredible, largely because Alan Parsons was involved in that process. And Pink Floyd were so impressed with what Parsons did with their album, they wanted him to be the sound engineer for their next release, Wish You Were Here. But Parsons declined, and that's when he started his own venture, the Alan Parsons Project. So moving along, this is another one from that era, from 1973, David Bowie's Aladdin Sane. I play this all the time. I love this album. It's my favorite Bowie release. So many great songs on here with Drive In Saturday, Cracked Actor, just amazing. Gene Genie, just so many great songs, and Mick Ronson, guitarist for David Bowie, just really shreds. He does some of his best shredding on any of the Bowie recordings on this album. Just a great one from that year. I seriously listened to it virtually every day back then while I was in high school. And today I still listen to it very frequently, far more frequently than anything else I have. Perhaps because I'm a lad insane. So, going on, Quadrophenia by The Who. This album spoke to an entire generation in a way that perhaps some people don't understand. And that is the feelings of alienation and separation from even people in our own family. And I remember doing like a mini presentation while in high school. I think I was a senior in high school at that time when I did this, but talking about that theme and in the rock opera. And I can remember later in life when for a while, I was working with teenagers, either with learning problems or other issues that largely revolved around their home life. And when I would play this album for them, there was this instant connection. They just immediately identified with the themes in these songs, particularly the ones of that sense of isolation, not just from your family, but from your peers, and that feeling of being different, and you're just trying to fit in all the time. It really resonated with a lot of teenagers, and has throughout the decades. It's an incredible masterpiece by The Who. Also, 1973, we got Paul McCartney venturing off into solo projects with band On the Run. Got the white vinyl version here. Good stuff. I remember, again, listening to this a lot in high school, but I didn't own it, a copy of it, until much more recently. I always there was always this rumor. I was living in Tucson, and there was always this rumor that they recorded part, or maybe they wrote some of the material when they were in the Tucson area, this little town called Marana. And, there is, the sequence in there where they're talking about the desert and all that. So I don't know if it's true. I'll have to do some more reading on that one. Then I've got another couple here released by The Boss. 1973 was a good year for The Boss. We have Greetings from Asbury Park, and Bruce Springsteen also released The Wild and the Innocent and the E Street Shuffle. Great. I say that a lot. Great. We're not talking about genealogy. That's a different video. Anyway, Rosalita is probably the one that I associate the most with this one. Yeah, I know I've got some serious ring wear on this. I'm going to have to start keeping the vinyl outside of the sleeve, which is like what I do with this one here. But Greetings from Asbury Park, this is the one in which the original version of the song, of course, the cover with all the lyrics, Blinded by the Light, which was that song that Manfred Mann kind of butchered the lyrics so that everybody thought the song was about being wrapped up in a douche. What was that? Crazy. But you can clearly hear it in the original version that that's not quite what the song is about. I mean, it's Bruce Springsteen. It's going to be about cars. Um, then also released in 1973 is Goathead Soup by the Stones. It's one of the weaker albums by the Stones. You know, they started that incredible period with Beggar's Banquet that kind of went all the way up to Some Girls. And this one is, I mean, it's a good album, but it's one of the weaker ones in that mix. I mean, there's Dancing with Mr. D. Angie's on this album. Let me pull it out here because this is one of these releases that doesn't have any information on the album cover itself. Silver Train. Can You Hear the Music? I mean, there's good songs on here, but like I say, this was a period where, or when I should say, the Stones were just really cementing not only their identity as a band, but their sound, which was always, has a blues root to it. But this is when they really, this was the period when they were really cementing that sound and creating an identity around it. And like I say, it's good, but it's one of the weaker ones. Um, then we've got this one, Raw Power, Iggy and the Stooges. Sometimes Iggy Pop is referred to as the godfather of punk, um, which, yeah, I can see why he would get some of that credit. But actually, there are or were a lot of punk bands made up of all black musicians, and they were among probably the earliest punksters. And I need to do some more research on that. I need to look up some of their material. I bet you it's pretty hard to find. But anyway, Iggy and the Stooges, this is a re-release that has two LPs in it. One of them with the original David Bowie mix, and then another one that is remastered and with a mix by Iggy Pop. The weird thing is, I've only listened, even with this one, I've only listened to the David Bowie mix. One of these days, I'm going to have to sit down and listen to the Iggy Pop mix and kind of get an assessment of which one might be better or if there is even a significant difference. Okay. And sorry that I think my camera just kind of whoa right there. I apologize for that. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Brain Salad Surgery. Of course, this album has Jerusalem and Benny the Bouncer and the big hit You Turn Me On. Interesting backstory about this. When Dr. John came out, excuse me, with his Grammy-winning album, Right Place, Wrong Time, there was a line in that song referring to brain salad surgery. And so in ELP, they had another working title for this album. They decided to go with that. Their working title was a euphemism, just as brain salad surgery is, but they liked this one better. And the euphemism is for fellatio. So, interesting little fact about not a common phrase. I haven't heard that one. All right. This was a truly big album in my high school years, and it is also a 1973 release. This is a reissue of Tres Hombres by ZZ Top on the great, jalapeno green vinyl. Um, I happened to catch a concert with them at around this time when this album came out at a small college, and the opening act was Rush. So great record. This is the only ZZ Top I have. I really, I like some of their other later material, but this is really the only album I have any desire to own. Well, okay. Um, Now, when Miles Davis did um, Bitches Brew, and then In the Silent Way before that, he was being credited with the development and the introduction into the music scene of what we have come to call jazz fusion. And he had many, many, many great musicians with him. And after or after in particular Bitches Brew was released, these musicians went off and started doing their own projects, formed their own groups, creating their own music around this sound that became known as jazz fusion. And the Mahavishnu Orchestra with John McLaughlin was one of these groups that developed. There were many others as well, but we've got Billy Cobham and Jan Hammer also in this group. Really wild stuff, but also really, really good. Uh, just incredible music. A lot of jazz fusion in that era of around 1971, maybe up to about 1976, or maybe a little bit later, was really, really incredible. You ought to check it out. And then moving on to the next one, we have, yes, Tales of Topographic Oceans. Um, Great album. I don't listen to it very much. Amazing artwork. I mean, yes, albums have just some incredible artwork. This is the Steven Wilson remix, so it came in a box set with other releases. So it's just amazing sound, really high quality cover. The cardboard stock is really, really nice. And the Steven Wilson remixes of the early Yes albums is really worth the money to plunk down for it. I purchased it when it first came out, so we're looking at, I spent maybe slightly less than $100 for brand new, but we're talking 5 or 6 albums. Okay, so when you break that down into the cost per album, it's not a bad deal, and it's great sounding, and you just get a lot of stuff with it. Um, Down to my last two, and the first one here is Joe Walsh, the smoker you drink, the player you get. Um, this was an album that I actually, and it actually goes this way. Here's the spine. This was an album that I bought on a lark. I didn't really know anything about Joe Walsh, but it just seemed like, yeah, maybe I like it. I did hear the song Rocky Mountain Way on the radio back in the day when FM radio would play long songs, and they would play them off the album instead of something that the record company sent them. Well, of course they had the releases that were designed for that, but anyway, um, when I listened to the entire album, I just fell in love with it. Just amazing. And I really started to like Joe Walsh's work. And many of his songs on his albums before he ventured off with the Eagles are very nostalgic and reminiscent of happier times, perhaps with family. He certainly had a lot of other really strong rockers as well, but that's kind of what really appealed to me about with Joe Walsh was that nostalgic feel that many of his songs had, and Needless to say, I have several releases by Joe Walsh. Really love his songwriting and also really love his guitar work. And then finishing off here, at just slightly over 20 minutes, is Lou Reed, Berlin. And this happens to be a Japanese pressing. I dismissed this record for many, 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 many years. And I really love the live versions of the songs on here, such as Oh Jim and Sad Song, which show up on Rock and Roll Animal, and also Lou Reed Live, which incidentally are taken from the same show. I don't know why they never released it as a double album set of that show. They're both just really great. Anyway, so it was many, many years before I listened to it and then realized this is a really, really strong Lou Reed album where he's really, he was always a very strong songwriter and performer, but you can sense that he's developing something new in terms of his content and presentation at this time. So there you have it. Those are the records from 1973 that I wanted, kind of a half decade. We'll be venturing into 1978 later, which will be a full decade. But I wanted to cover these. I hope you enjoy this, and I hope if you are unfamiliar with some of these releases that you hunt them down, and I hope then you do enjoy them. So remember to click subscribe, down in the down under. And I, again, will see you next time. And always remember, enjoy your music.